The doctor's words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Miss Helena, I am sorry, but with your legs the way they are now, no man will ever want you, and you will never have any real value in this world." Florence Helena sat in the wooden wheelchair her father had hastily constructed after the wagon accident 3 months prior, staring at the floor of the doctor's office in Eureka, Nevada. The year was 1878, and she had just turned 19. The accident had crushed both of her legs beneath the weight of a toppled supply wagon, and though the bones had set, they had healed poorly. She could barely stand, let alone walk more than a few agonizing steps with crutches. The pain was constant, a dull throb that reminded her every waking moment of what she had lost. Her father, Thomas Helena, stood behind her chair, his weathered hands gripping the wooden handles so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He had been a freight hauler for 20 years, but the accident that had injured Florence had also destroyed his business. The wagon had been carrying their entire inventory of goods meant for the mining camps up in the mountains. Everything was gone. The insurance company had refused to pay, claiming negligence, and now they were destitute. "Thank you for your time, Dr. Morrison," Thomas said quietly, his voice strained. He began wheeling Florence toward the door. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Helena, I know of an institution in Carson City. They take care of women like your daughter. It would be the kindest thing you could do for her. She could live there, be cared for, away from the harsh judgments of society." Florence felt her stomach turn. An institution. A place where they sent people to be forgotten. She opened her mouth to protest, but her father spoke first. "My daughter is not going anywhere. She is staying with me." They left the office and emerged into the bright Nevada sunlight. Eureka was a bustling mining town, filled with prospectors, miners, merchants, and all manner of people seeking their fortunes in the silver mines that dotted the surrounding mountains. The main street was crowded with horses, wagons, and people going about their business. Florence could feel the stares as her father wheeled her down the wooden boardwalk. Some people looked away quickly, uncomfortable. Others stared openly, their expressions ranging from pity to disgust. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink into the earth and never be seen again. "Father, maybe the doctor is right," she said softly as they turned down a side street toward their small rented room above the general store. "Maybe I would be better off somewhere else. I am nothing but a burden to you now." Thomas stopped the chair abruptly and came around to kneel in front of his daughter. His face was lined with age and hardship, but his eyes were fierce with love. "Do not ever say that again. You are my daughter. You are worth more to me than all the silver in these mountains. We will find a way forward together." Florence nodded, but she could not stop the tears that fell. She knew what the future held. Her father was already working double shifts at the assay office just to pay for their single room. She could not contribute. She could not cook properly from her chair, could not clean, could not do any of the work expected of a woman. She was useless. That night, as her father slept on his bedroll on the floor, giving her the only bed in their small room, Florence stared at the ceiling and wondered if it would be better if she had died in the accident. At least then her father would not be saddled with caring for her. At least then she would not have to face the pitying stares and whispered comments every time she left their room. The next morning, Thomas left for work before dawn. Florence managed to maneuver herself from the bed into her wheelchair, a process that took nearly 20 minutes and left her breathless and sweating from the effort and pain. She wheeled herself to the small window that overlooked the main street and watched the town come to life. Miners heading to the diggings, merchants opening their shops, women in their long dresses hurrying to the market. She was so absorbed in her observations that she did not hear the commotion downstairs until it grew too loud to ignore. Shouting, the sound of breaking glass, then gunshots. Florence's heart leaped into her throat. She wheeled herself to the door and opened it, listening. More shouting, heavy footsteps on the stairs. She tried to close the door, but it was too late. 3 men burst into the hallway, their faces covered with bandanas, guns drawn. "Well, well, what do we have here?" one of them said, spotting Florence in her doorway. He pushed his way into her room and the other 2 followed. "Looks like we found ourselves a little insurance policy, boys. Please, I have nothing of value," Florence said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just leave me alone." The lead man, tall and lean with cold blue eyes above his bandana, holstered his gun and grabbed the handles of her wheelchair. "Oh, you have value, sweetheart. You are coming with us. The law will not shoot at us if we have a hostage." Before Florence could protest, they were dragging her chair down the stairs, bumping roughly over each step. The pain in her legs was excruciating, but she bit her lip to keep from crying out. Down in the general store, the owner and his wife were tied up on the floor, their cash box emptied. The bandits had clearly been robbing the store when something had gone wrong. Outside, the street was in chaos. The town sheriff and 2 deputies had their guns drawn, positioned behind barrels and posts. The bandits dragged Florence out onto the boardwalk, using her chair as a shield. "Back off or the girl gets hurt," the leader shouted. The sheriff, a stocky man with a thick mustache, lowered his rifle slightly. "Let her go. There is no need for this. We are leaving town, and she is coming with us to make sure nobody follows," the bandit said. They began dragging Florence toward their horses, tied up at the hitching post. Her mind raced. If they got her on a horse, if they took her out of town, she was as good as dead. They would have no use for a crippled girl once they were safely away. She would be left in the desert to die, or worse. Just as they reached the horses, a voice rang out across the street. "I would not do that if I were you." Everyone turned. A man stood at the far end of the street, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty brown duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He had dark hair that fell to his collar and a strong, weathered face with sharp features. A gun belt sat low on his hips, and his hand hovered near the holstered revolver. The lead bandit laughed. "And who are you supposed to be? Some kind of hero?" The man started walking toward them, his boots striking the wooden boardwalk with steady, measured steps. "Name is Blake Emerson. I am just a cowboy passing through, but I do not take kindly to seeing a woman mistreated. This is none of your business, cowboy. Keep walking." Blake stopped about 20 feet away. His eyes, a striking shade of green, moved from the bandits to Florence, and something in his expression softened when he saw her. "Madam, are you all right?" Florence found herself unable to speak. There was something about this stranger that commanded attention, a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the space around him. "She is fine, and she will stay fine if you turn around and leave," the bandit said, cocking his pistol and pressing it against Florence's temple. Blake's jaw tightened. "I will give you one chance to let her go and ride out of here. Take it." Or what? What happened next occurred so fast that Florence barely registered it. Blake's hand moved like lightning, drawing his revolver and firing 3 shots in rapid succession. The gun at her head clattered to the boardwalk as the bandit stumbled back, shot through the shoulder. The other 2 bandits reached for their weapons, but Blake fired again, hitting one in the leg and causing the other to dive for cover behind a water trough. The sheriff and his deputies sprang into action, rushing forward to apprehend the wounded bandits. The third one, seeing he was outnumbered, threw down his gun and raised his hands in surrender. Blake holstered his weapon and approached Florence. Up close, She could see the concern in his eyes, the way they scanned her face and then dropped to her legs in the wheelchair. "Did they hurt you, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "No, thank you, you saved my life," Florence managed to say. Blake knelt down so he was at her eye level. "What is your name?" "Florence Helena." "Miss Helena, it is a pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less severe. "Those men are cowards. Taking a hostage is the lowest thing a man can do." The sheriff approached, clapping Blake on the shoulder. "That was some fine shooting, Mr. Emerson. You are lucky you happened to be here when you were." Blake stood but kept his attention on Florence. "I do not believe in luck, Sheriff. I believe in being where you are needed." Over the next hour, as the sheriff hauled the bandits to jail and took statements from witnesses, Blake stayed with Florence. He helped wheel her back upstairs to her room, carefully lifting the front wheels of the chair over each step with a strength that made it look effortless. Once inside, he pulled up a wooden crate to sit on. "May I ask what happened to your legs?" he said. "You do not have to answer if you do not want to." Florence hesitated, then told him about the wagon accident, about her father's ruined business, about the doctor's harsh words. As she spoke, she watched his face for signs of the pity or disgust she had grown accustomed to seeing. But there was none. He listened intently, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful. "That doctor is a fool," Blake said when she finished. "And he is wrong." "About what?" "About you having no value. A person's value is not measured by whether they can walk or run or dance. It comes from here." He tapped his chest. "From their heart and their spirit, and from what I have seen this morning, you have plenty of both." Florence felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You do not know me. How can you say that?" "I saw the way you held yourself together when those men had a gun to your head. I saw the concern in your eyes for your father when you talked about him working himself to death for you. That tells me everything I need to know." Before Florence could respond, her father burst through the door, his face pale with fear. "Florence, I heard about what happened. Are you hurt?" "I am fine, father. This man, Mr. Emerson, he saved me." Thomas turned to Blake, his eyes shining with tears. "Sir, I do not know how to thank you. My daughter is everything to me." Blake stood and shook Thomas's hand. "No thanks necessary. I am just glad I was here." Thomas insisted that Blake join them for supper that evening, and despite Blake's initial protests, he eventually agreed. Florence spent the afternoon trying to make their small room more presentable, which was difficult given her limited mobility. She managed to sweep the floor by holding the broom while seated in her chair, and she directed her father in preparing a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread. When Blake arrived at sunset, he had cleaned up and changed into a fresh shirt. He brought a bottle of whiskey and a small bag of sugar cookies from the bakery. "For you, Miss Helena," he said, handing her the cookies. "I noticed you did not have any dessert planned." The gesture touched Florence deeply. It had been so long since anyone had thought to do something kind for her. Over supper, Blake told them about himself. He had been born in Texas, raised on a cattle ranch until his parents died of fever when he was 16. He had spent the last 9 years working as a drover, a ranch hand, and occasionally as a gun for hire when the cause was just. He had no family left, no ties to any particular place. "What brings you to Eureka?" Thomas asked. "I heard there was work here for men who know their way around horses and cattle. Some of the mine owners need supplies brought in from California, and they pay well for experienced drovers. Will you be staying in town long?" Florence asked, trying to keep her tone casual even though her heart was beating faster than normal. Blake's eyes met hers across the table. "That depends on whether I find a reason to stay." After supper, Blake helped Florence move from the table back to her chair, his hands gentle but sure. Thomas, exhausted from his long day and the emotional strain of nearly losing his daughter, excused himself to bed early. Blake and Florence sat by the window, looking out at the darkening street below. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and dust from the desert beyond the town. "May I ask you something personal, Miss Helena?" Blake said after a long silence. "Please call me Florence." "Florence, then. Do you believe what that doctor said? Do you truly think you have no value?" Florence was quiet for a moment, weighing her answer. "I do not know what I believe anymore. I know I am a burden to my father. I know I cannot do the things I used to do. I know that no man will ever want to marry me, which means I will never have a family of my own. So what value do I have?" Blake turned his chair to face her directly. "You have the value that every human being has simply by existing. You have the value of your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. And as for no man wanting to marry you, well, that just shows how blind most men are." Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You do not have to say things like that to make me feel better." "I am not saying it to make you feel better. I am saying it because it is true." Blake leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Florence, I have been all over the West. I have met hundreds of people. And I can tell you that most of them were so concerned with appearances, with what others thought, that they never took the time to see what really mattered. You have been through something terrible, and instead of becoming bitter or hateful, you are worried about being a burden to your father. You still find the strength to smile. That is not weakness, that is courage. I do not feel courageous. The bravest people never do." They talked long into the night about everything and nothing. Blake told her stories about cattle drives, about sleeping under the stars, about the wild beauty of the untamed lands. Florence told him about her childhood, about her mother who had died when she was young, about her dreams of one day seeing the ocean. When Blake finally left, promising to return the next day, Florence sat by the window long after he had disappeared into the night. Something had shifted inside her, some small spark of hope that she had thought was extinguished forever. True to his word, Blake returned the next morning. And the morning after that, and the one after that. He found work with one of the freight companies, which meant he would be in Eureka for at least a few more weeks. Every moment he was not working, he spent with Florence. He took her outside in her wheelchair, pushing her through the streets of Eureka, pointing out interesting sights, introducing her to people he met. At first, Florence was self-conscious about being seen in public, but Blake's easy confidence seemed to deflect the stares and whispers. When people looked at them, he would simply tip his hat and say good morning as if there was nothing unusual about the situation at all. One afternoon, about a week after they had met, Blake pushed Florence's chair out to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open desert. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, the mountains rose like jagged teeth against the horizon. "It is beautiful," Florence said softly. "It is," Blake agreed, "but not as beautiful as you." Florence turned to look at him, startled. "Blake, you should not say things like that." "Why not? It is true because I am crippled. I am not beautiful, I am broken." Blake came around to kneel in front of her chair again as he had that first day. "You are not broken, Florence. You are different from how you were before, yes. But that does not make you less. It does not make you not beautiful." He reached out and gently took her hand. "I have been thinking about something for days now, and I need to tell you." Florence's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What?" "I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Florence felt like she could not breathe. "You cannot be. We have only known each other a week." "I do not care if it has been a week or a day or a year. I know what I feel. Every morning I wake up and the first thing I think about is seeing you. Every night before I sleep, your face is the last thing in my mind. When I am not with you, I am thinking about what I want to tell you, what I want to show you. That is love, Florence, and I will not apologize for it or pretend it is not real. Tears spilled down Florence's cheeks. Blake, even if what you say is true, it does not matter. I cannot be what you need. I cannot run a household properly. I cannot bear children safely, the doctor said so. I cannot even walk beside you like a normal woman would. Blake squeezed her hand. I do not need you to be anything other than what you are. And as for walking beside me, well, I have 2 strong legs. I can walk for both of us. As for children, if God sees fit to bless us with them, wonderful. If not, then having you is blessing enough. And as for running a household, Florence, I have been running my own household since I was 16 years old. I can cook and clean and do laundry with the best of them. What I cannot do is face the rest of my life without you in it. You are crazy, Florence said, but she was smiling through her tears. Maybe, but I have been called worse things. Blake reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. I am not asking you to make any decisions right now. I am just asking you to let me court you properly. Let me show you that I mean what I say. And if, after some time has passed, you decide you do not want me, I will accept that and move on. But I had to tell you how I felt. I could not keep it inside anymore. Florence looked into his green eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and warmth. All right, she whispered. You can court me. Blake's face broke into a wide smile. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You have just made me the happiest man in Nevada. As they sat there watching the sun set over the desert, Florence felt something she had not felt since before the accident. She felt hope. She felt like maybe, just maybe, her life was not over. Maybe there was still happiness waiting for her. The next few weeks were the happiest Florence could remember. Blake courted her with a dedication and creativity that amazed her. He could not take her dancing, so he brought a harmonica player to their room and played music while he told her stories of all the places they would go together. He could not take her riding, so he borrowed a wagon with a padded seat and drove her out into the countryside, showing her wildflowers and letting her feel the wind in her hair. He treated her not as an invalid to be pitied, but as a woman to be cherished. He asked her opinions on things, listened to her ideas, valued her thoughts. He made her laugh with his stories and made her think with his questions. He was affectionate but respectful, holding her hand, stealing quick kisses on the cheek, but never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Her father watched the courtship with mixed emotions. He was grateful to Blake for saving Florence's life, and he could see how happy the man made his daughter. But he also worried. What if Blake's feelings were temporary? What if he left? Florence had been hurt enough already. One evening, Blake asked to speak with Thomas privately. They went downstairs to the general store after it had closed, sitting among the barrels and sacks of goods. Mr. Helena, I want to marry your daughter, Blake said without preamble. Thomas had been expecting this, but hearing the words still made his chest tighten. You have known her less than a month. I know. But I also know that I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love her, sir. I love her strength and her kindness and her spirit. I love the way she sees the world. I love how she makes me want to be a better man. Florence is not like other women, Blake. She needs special care. She will need help with things that other wives could do on their own. Are you truly prepared for that? Yes, sir, I am. I have thought about nothing else for weeks. I have saved money from my work here. I have enough to buy us a small piece of land outside of town, build a house. I can make it work. I will make it work. Thomas studied the younger man's face, looking for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. He found none. Do you know what people will say? They will say you married her out of pity. They will say you could have done better. They will question your judgment. Let them say what they want. I do not live my life based on the opinions of fools. And if Florence cannot give you children, the doctor said the damage to her pelvis makes pregnancy dangerous. Then we will not have children, or we will adopt. There are plenty of orphan children in this world who need good homes. Mr. Helena, I understand your concerns, truly I do, but you need to understand something. I am going to marry your daughter with or without your blessing. I would prefer to have it because I respect you and I do not want to cause a rift between you and Florence. But I will not live without her. I cannot. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. You have my blessing, but if you ever hurt her, if you ever make her feel like she is less than what she is, I will hunt you down myself. Blake shook his hand firmly. Fair enough. But that will never happen, I promise you. 2 days later, Blake proposed to Florence on the same spot where he had first told her he loved her, at the edge of town overlooking the desert. He got down on one knee in the dirt, holding her hand. Florence Helena, I know we have not known each other long by most people's standards. But I also know that some people go their whole lives without finding what we have found in these few weeks. You are my heart. You are my home. You are everything I did not know I was searching for. Will you marry me? Florence was crying again, but this time they were tears of pure joy. Yes. Yes, Blake, I will marry you. He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. It had belonged to his mother, one of the few things he had left from his old life. It is not much, but it was made with love, and I give it to you with love. It is perfect, Florence whispered. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Eureka. Florence wore a simple blue dress that Blake had bought for her, and she carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers. Her father walked her down the aisle in her wheelchair, tears streaming down his weathered face. Blake stood at the altar, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, had initially expressed concerns about the marriage, questioning whether it was appropriate given Florence's condition. Blake had made it very clear that if the Reverend did not want to perform the ceremony, they would find someone who would. The Reverend had quickly changed his tune. As they exchanged vows, Florence felt like she was in a dream. This man, this strong, kind, incredible man, was choosing her. Not despite her limitations, but simply because of who she was. I, Blake Emerson, take you, Florence Helena, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for richer or poorer, until death parts us. I promise to be your strength when you are weak, your comfort when you are sad, your celebration when you are joyful. I promise to see you always as you truly are, priceless and irreplaceable. When it was Florence's turn, her voice shook with emotion. I, Florence Helena, take you, Blake Emerson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you with all that I am and all that I have. I promise to support your dreams and share your burdens. I promise to be your partner, your companion, your friend, and your love for all the days of my life. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Blake did not just kiss her gently. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply, thoroughly, in a way that made it clear to everyone present that this was a real marriage built on real love. The small group of people who had come to the wedding, mostly friends Blake had made during his time in Eureka, and a few of the more open-minded townspeople, applauded. Thomas was openly weeping, overcome with a mixture of happiness for his daughter and sadness at the realization that she was no longer solely his to protect. After the ceremony, there was a modest celebration at the boarding house where Blake had been staying. The landlady, A kind woman named Margaret, who had been won over by Blake's devotion to Florence, had prepared a wedding feast of roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables, and a cake she had baked herself. As the evening wore on and the guests gradually departed, Blake carried Florence up to what was now their room. He had moved his few belongings in that morning, and the room that had once been cramped with just Florence and her father now felt full but cozy with Blake's presence. He set her gently on the bed and knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Florence answered honestly. "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." That night, Blake was gentle and patient with Florence, mindful of her pain and her limitations. He made her feel beautiful and desired and whole. When she cried, overwhelmed by the intensity of her emotions, he held her and kissed her tears away. "You are mine now," he whispered against her hair. "And I am yours. Nothing else matters." The next morning, Blake surprised Florence by announcing that he had purchased a small piece of land about 2 miles outside of town. It had a creek running through it and a view of the mountains. He had already hired 2 men to start building them a house. "I want us to have a real home," he said. "Not just a rented room, but a place that is ours, a place where we can build our life together." Over the next 3 months, Blake worked tirelessly on their house. He continued his job with the freight company during the day and worked on the house in the evenings and on Sundays. Florence's father helped as much as he could, grateful to Blake for giving his daughter a future and wanting to contribute in any way possible. Blake designed the house with Florence's needs in mind. It was a single story, so there would be no stairs to navigate. The doorways were wider than standard to accommodate her wheelchair. The kitchen had a lower counter where Florence could work while seated. There was a ramp instead of steps at the front door, but he did not make it feel like an invalid's house. It was warm and welcoming, with large windows that let in plenty of light and a big fireplace for cold winter nights. He built a covered porch where Florence could sit and enjoy the outdoors without being in the direct sun. When it was finally finished, Blake carried Florence over the threshold, wheelchair and all, making her laugh at his stubbornness. "Welcome home, Mrs. Emerson," he said, setting her down in the middle of their new parlor. Florence looked around at the space Blake had created for them, at the care and thought he had put into every detail, and she felt her heart swell with love. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "I am far from perfect, but I am yours," Blake said, kissing the top of her head. They settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Blake proved to be as good at household tasks as he had claimed, cooking meals and doing laundry without complaint. Florence took over managing their finances and correspondence, using her education to keep their books in order and help Blake negotiate better rates for his freight work. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset, talking about their day, making plans for the future. Blake would often read to Florence from the newspapers and dime novels he brought home from town, doing funny voices for the different characters that made her laugh until her sides ached. Their neighbors, a couple named Samuel and Ruth who ran a small ranch nearby, came to visit one afternoon about a month after Blake and Florence had moved in. Ruth was heavily pregnant with their 4th child and moved with the ungainly waddle of a woman in her final weeks. "We wanted to come by and welcome you properly," Samuel said, a tall man with a thick beard and a friendly smile. "It is nice to have neighbors out this way." Ruth immediately took to Florence, seeing past the wheelchair to the intelligent, kind woman beneath. The 2 women became fast friends, with Ruth visiting often to escape her boisterous sons and enjoy adult conversation. One day, about 6 months after the wedding, Ruth went into labor. Samuel came pounding on Blake and Florence's door in a panic. The midwife from town was attending another birth and could not come. Ruth was progressing quickly, and there was no time to fetch the doctor from Eureka. "Please," Samuel begged. "I do not know what to do. My mother helped with the other births, but she passed last winter." Florence did not hesitate. "Blake, get me over there." "Florence, are you sure?" "You have never delivered a baby before," Blake said, though he was already moving to get her wheelchair. "My mother was a midwife. I helped her with dozens of births before she died. I can do this." Blake pushed her quickly to Samuel and Ruth's house. Inside, Ruth was in the bedroom, pacing and breathing through contractions. When she saw Florence, relief flooded her face. "Thank God. Florence, I am so frightened. This one feels different from the others." Florence had Blake wheel her close to the bed. She took Ruth's hand and looked her in the eye. "Listen to me. You have done this 3 times before. Your body knows what to do. I am right here with you, and we are going to bring this baby into the world safely." Over the next several hours, Florence coached Ruth through the labor, directing Blake and Samuel on how to help. She could not stand to check Ruth's progress, but Blake became her hands and eyes, following her instructions without question. When the baby finally came, a healthy girl with a powerful set of lungs, Florence felt tears of joy streaming down her face. Blake placed the baby in Ruth's arms, then turned to Florence with a look of pure awe. "You were amazing," he said softly. Word of Florence's skills spread through their small community. Over the next few months, 3 more women came to her when they were expecting, asking her to attend their births. Florence found a new sense of purpose in helping these women, in using the knowledge her mother had given her to bring new life into the world. Blake supported her completely, helping her get to and from the births, acting as her assistant when needed. He was proud of his wife and made sure everyone knew it. One evening in late autumn, almost a year after they had married, Florence and Blake were sitting by their fireplace. Florence had been quieter than usual all day, and Blake finally asked what was troubling her. "I went to see Dr. Morrison today," she said softly. Blake's head snapped up, concern flooding his features. "Are you all right? Are you in pain?" "No, nothing like that. I went to ask him about something." She paused, twisting her wedding ring around her finger nervously. "Blake, I want to try to have a baby." Blake set down the piece of leather he had been working on and moved to kneel in front of her chair. "Florence, the doctor said it was dangerous for you. I will not risk losing you." "I know what he said." But that was before, when he saw me as having no value anyway. I asked him to really look at my injuries, to tell me honestly what the risks were. He said that while there would be risks, particularly during the birth, it was not impossible. Women with injuries like mine have had babies before. Some of them safely. Some of them. What about the others? Florence took his face in her hands. "Blake, I know I could die, but every woman risks death when she becomes pregnant. At least I would be dying trying to build the life I want, the life we want together. I want to have your child. I want to give you a son or daughter to carry on your name. I want to experience that with you. I do not need a child to carry on my name. I need you, just you. And you have me. You will always have me, but please, Blake, let us try, just once. If I become pregnant and it is too dangerous, we will do whatever the doctor says. But let me try." Blake searched her face, seeing the determination there, the longing. He understood it. He wanted children too if he was honest with himself, but not at the cost of Florence's life. "Promise me something," he said finally. "Promise me that if at any point it becomes too dangerous, you will let it go. Promise me that you will choose to live, even if it means losing the baby." It was not an easy promise for Florence to make, but she saw the fear in her husband's eyes and knew what he was asking. "I promise." They tried for several months with no success. Florence began to think that perhaps the damage from her accident had made pregnancy impossible after all. But then, in early spring of 1880, she began to feel nauseous in the mornings. Her monthly courses stopped. Her breasts became tender. She waited another few weeks to be sure before telling Blake. When she finally did, his reaction was a mixture of joy and terror. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Then, looking up at her face, "You are going to be all right. I will make sure of it." Dr. Morrison confirmed the pregnancy and admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that Florence seemed to be handling it well so far. He warned them that the real dangers would come in the later months and during the birth itself, but he agreed to monitor her closely. As Florence's belly grew, Blake became increasingly protective. He tried to limit how much she did, how often she left the house, how many births she attended. Florence had to remind him gently but firmly that she was pregnant, not dying. "I need to feel useful," she told him one day when he had suggested she stop taking on any more midwifery cases. "I need to have a purpose beyond just carrying this baby. Please do not take that away from me." Blake relented, but he insisted on being with her for every birth she attended, ready to bring her home at a moment's notice if she became tired or unwell. The pregnancy was not easy. Florence's legs, already weak and painful, struggled with the additional weight. By the 6th month, she could no longer use her crutches at all, even for the short distances she had managed before. She was completely dependent on her wheelchair and on Blake's help for everything. There were nights when the pain was so intense she could not sleep, and Blake would sit up with her, rubbing her legs, telling her stories, doing anything he could to distract her from the discomfort. "I am sorry," she whispered one particularly difficult night. "I am sorry I am putting you through this." "Do not you dare apologize," Blake said fiercely. "You are growing our child. You are the strongest person I have ever known. There is nothing to be sorry for." In her 8th month, Florence began having what the doctor called false labor pains. They would come and go, sometimes lasting for hours, making everyone think the baby was coming early. Blake was a nervous wreck, jumping at every sound Florence made, checking on her constantly. Finally, on a warm day in late October, 3 weeks before the baby was due, Florence's water broke while she was preparing lunch. The real labor had begun. Blake sent for Dr. Morrison and Ruth, who had offered to help with the birth. He then focused all his attention on Florence, helping her change into a nightgown and get comfortable on their bed. "I am frightened," Florence admitted as a contraction gripped her. "I know. I am too, but we are going to get through this together, just like we get through everything, together." The labor lasted 16 hours. It was the longest 16 hours of Blake's life. He held Florence's hand, wiped her brow, breathed with her through the contractions, and prayed harder than he had ever prayed before. Dr. Morrison monitored the situation closely, ready to intervene if necessary. But Florence's body, despite its limitations, seemed to know what to do. The baby was positioned correctly, and Florence's determination pushed her through the pain and exhaustion. Just after dawn on October 23, 1880, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. Blake cut the cord with shaking hands while Ruth cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket. Dr. Morrison tended to Florence, making sure she was not bleeding too heavily, checking that everything was as it should be. When Ruth finally placed the baby in Florence's arms, Blake sat on the edge of the bed beside them, looking at his new family with wonder. "We have a son," Florence said, her voice hoarse from labor but filled with joy. "Blake, we have a son." "You did it," Blake said, his voice thick with emotion. "You survived. You both survived." They named him Benjamin after Blake's father, with the middle name Thomas after Florence's. Little Benjamin was a calm baby, alert and watchful even from his first days. He seemed to study the world around him with serious eyes, as if taking everything in. Florence healed slowly from the birth, but she healed. Dr. Morrison admitted, with something that almost sounded like respect, that she had defied his expectations. Florence chose to take it as the compliment he probably had not meant it to be. The first few months with Benjamin were exhausting. Florence could not stand to walk the floor with him when he cried, could not easily move around the house while holding him. But she and Blake developed a system. He would bring Benjamin to her when it was time to nurse, would change his diapers and clothes at her direction, would carry him from room to room while Florence supervised from her chair. They were partners in parenting just as they were partners in everything else. Benjamin grew quickly, a happy, healthy child who adored both his parents. By the time he was 6 months old, he was sitting up on his own, reaching for everything within his grasp, babbling constantly in his own baby language. Blake had scaled back his work with the freight company to be home more, instead raising horses on their property. He had a natural way with the animals, and word spread that Blake Emerson could train even the most stubborn horse. People began coming from all over the county to buy horses from him, or to have him train their animals. The business provided enough income for them to live comfortably, and it kept Blake close to home where he could help with Benjamin and Florence. One afternoon, when Benjamin was nearly a year old and pulling himself up to stand on everything he could reach, Ruth came to visit with her own children. The older boys went outside to help Blake with the horses while Ruth and Florence watched the little ones play on a blanket spread on the floor of the parlor. "You have a beautiful family," Ruth said, not for the first time. "I do," Florence agreed. "There were so many times I thought this life was impossible for me. When I was first injured, I wanted to die. I could not imagine why God would let me survive if I was just going to be a burden to everyone around me. And now I understand that having value does not mean being perfect or whole in body. It means being loved and giving love in return. Blake taught me that. He looked at me and saw past the broken legs to the person I really am. He saw me as priceless when everyone else, including myself, saw me as worthless." Ruth reached over and squeezed Florence's hand. "He is a good man, but you are a good woman. You both found each other exactly when you needed to." As the years passed, Blake and Florence's life together continued to blossom. Benjamin grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses almost as much as his father did. By the age of 4, he was already following Blake around the ranch, mimicking everything his father did. Florence continued her midwifery work, becoming known throughout the region as the woman who could help even the most difficult births. She had a calm presence and a wealth of knowledge that put laboring mothers at ease. Blake remained her constant assistant, never complaining about the late night calls or the hours spent helping bring new lives into the world. When Benjamin was 5 years old, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. Blake's initial reaction was panic, remembering how difficult the first pregnancy and birth had been. But Florence reminded him that they had survived it once, and they would survive it again. This pregnancy was somewhat easier than the first, perhaps because Florence's body had done it before and knew what to expect. Or perhaps it was simply that she was less frightened this time. She knew her own strength now, knew what she was capable of. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1886, a tiny thing with blonde hair and Blake's green eyes. They named her Marie after Blake's mother. If Benjamin had been a calm baby, Marie was the opposite. She was active from the start, always moving, always demanding attention, filling their house with noise and energy. Florence sometimes joked that God had given her a daughter who could run and jump and climb to make up for all the things Florence could not do. Blake would respond that Marie got her stubborn determination from her mother, which was far more important than working legs. Benjamin was a devoted big brother, protective and patient with his little sister, even when she destroyed his toys or interrupted his games. He would carefully explain things to her, show her how to do things, and hold her hand when she was frightened. As the children grew, Florence taught them both to read and write and do arithmetic. Benjamin loved books and would spend hours reading, while Marie preferred to be outside, helping her father with the horses or exploring the property. Blake made sure both children understood that their mother's wheelchair did not make her less than anyone else. When Benjamin was 7, he came home from town one day upset because some boys had made fun of his mother. They said Mama was a cripple, Benjamin said, his young face angry and hurt. They said it was weird that you married her. Blake knelt down to his son's level. Listen to me, Benjamin. Your mother is the strongest, bravest, most capable person I know. She has overcome more in her life than those boys and their families will ever face. You know why I married her? Because she is priceless. Because there is no one else in the world like her. And if those boys cannot see that, then they are the ones to be pitied, not her. But they laughed at her. People who laugh at others for being different are usually just scared of anything they do not understand. Your job is not to fight them or to be ashamed. Your job is to love your mother exactly as she is, and to treat everyone you meet with kindness, no matter what they look like or how they move through the world. Benjamin took his father's words to heart. From that day forward, if anyone said anything negative about Florence in his hearing, he would simply say, "That is my mother you are talking about, and she is priceless." Marie, who had never known a time when her mother could walk, simply accepted Florence's wheelchair as a normal part of life. She would climb onto Florence's lap for stories, would push the wheelchair around the house pretending to be a stage coach driver, would include the chair in her elaborate make-believe games. The family celebrated holidays and birthdays with enthusiasm. Blake would cook elaborate meals, with Florence directing from her place at the kitchen table and the children helping as best they could. They would invite Thomas, who still lived in Eureka but visited often, as well as Ruth and Samuel's family and other friends they had made over the years. Their house became known as a place of warmth and welcome, where anyone could come and be accepted for who they were. Florence's reputation as a midwife and healer had spread, and people came from as far as 50 miles away seeking her help. She never turned anyone away, and she never charged those who could not afford to pay. Blake supported her work completely, proud of the difference she made in people's lives. He had expanded their property over the years, buying adjacent land as it became available, building a successful horse ranch that provided well for their family. When Benjamin was 12 and Marie was 7, Thomas became ill. It started as a cough that would not go away and progressed quickly into something far more serious. The doctor called it consumption and said there was nothing to be done. Blake and Florence brought Thomas to live with them so Florence could care for him in his final days. He died peacefully in his sleep one night, with Florence holding his hand. At his funeral, she spoke about how her father had never stopped fighting for her, never stopped believing she had value, even when the rest of the world had written her off. "He taught me that love means standing by someone even when it is hard," Florence said, her voice steady despite her tears. "He could have sent me away to an institution after my accident. Everyone told him to, but he refused. He chose to keep me with him, to care for me, to see me as his daughter and not as a burden. That gift of his love and faith is what allowed me to survive long enough to meet Blake, to build this family, to have this life. I will never forget it. After Thomas's death, Florence inherited his small savings, which they used to add a larger barn to their property and to buy more breeding stock for the horses. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. As Benjamin entered his teenage years, he began to show an interest in more than just horses. He loved to read and write, and he talked about maybe becoming a teacher one day or perhaps a lawyer. Blake encouraged his son's intellectual pursuits, proud that Benjamin had inherited his mother's sharp mind. Marie, true to her nature, wanted to be a horse trainer like her father. At 10 years old, she was already working with the foals, showing a natural talent for understanding and communicating with the animals. Blake spent hours teaching her everything he knew, delighting in her enthusiasm and skill. Florence watched her children grow with a heart full of gratitude. There had been a time when she had been told she would never have a family, never have a purpose, never have value. And yet here she was, surrounded by love, making a difference in her community, raising 2 incredible children with a man who adored her. One evening, when Benjamin was 15 and Marie was 10, the family was sitting on the porch watching the sunset, as they had done countless times before. Blake was in his usual rocking chair, with Florence's wheelchair beside him. Benjamin was reading a book, and Marie was playing with a new litter of barn kittens. "Mama," Marie said suddenly, looking up from the kittens, "did it make you sad that you could not run and play with us when we were little?" Florence considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted. "There were moments when I wished I could chase you around the yard or dance with you. But mostly, I was just grateful I was there to see you play, to hear your laughter, to be part of your life at all. You do not need working legs to be a good mother, sweetheart. You just need a heart full of love." "I never thought you were less than other mothers," Marie said seriously. "You were always just mama to me." "That is because your parents raised you right," Blake said, reaching over to ruffle Marie's hair. Benjamin looked up from his book. "Father, why did you choose to marry Mama when you could have married someone who could walk? I know you said she was priceless, but what did you mean by that?" Blake thought for a moment before answering. "When I met your mother, she had been told by a doctor that she had no value because of her injury. She believed it. The whole town believed it. They looked at her and saw only what she could not do. But I looked at her and saw her courage, her kindness, her strength. I saw how she cared more about being a burden to her father than about her own pain. I saw a woman who had every reason to be bitter and angry but who still found reasons to smile. And I thought, this is someone worth knowing. This is someone worth loving. And I was right. Your mother is worth more than all the silver in these mountains, worth more than all the money in the world. That is what priceless means. It means beyond value. It means irreplaceable." Florence felt tears prick her eyes, as she often did when Blake spoke about his love for her. Even after all these years, he still had the power to make her feel cherished and valued. "I am the lucky one," Florence said softly. "I am the one who got the man who saw me when I felt invisible." Blake reached over and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "We are both lucky. We found each other." As the years continued to pass, Blake and Florence grew older but no less devoted to each other. Benjamin went to school in Carson City to become a lawyer, just as he had dreamed. He would come home during breaks with stories about his studies and his plans for the future. Marie stayed on the ranch, working alongside her father, becoming known in her own right as an exceptional horse trainer. At 18, she was handling horses that grown men could not manage, with a patience and intuition that seemed almost magical. Florence's midwifery work continued. though as she aged, she began training younger women to take over some of the work. She wanted to make sure that the knowledge her mother had given her, and that she had expanded through years of experience, would not be lost. On the evening of their 20th wedding anniversary, Blake surprised Florence with a trip. He had arranged for Marie to watch the ranch, and he took Florence to San Francisco for a week. It was Florence's first time seeing the ocean, a dream she had mentioned to him on the very first night they had talked. Blake had carefully researched to find a hotel that could accommodate Florence's wheelchair, and he had arranged for a specially designed bathing chair so Florence could sit at the water's edge and feel the waves wash over her feet. When Florence first saw the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, she wept with joy. "I never thought I would really see it," she said. "I thought it would remain just a dream." "Your dreams matter to me," Blake said simply. "They always have." They spent the week exploring the city, going to restaurants and theaters, walking along the waterfront. Blake pushed Florence's chair for miles, never once complaining, pointing out interesting sights, buying her treats from street vendors, making her laugh with his observations about city life versus ranch life. On their last night in San Francisco, they sat on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out at the ocean in the moonlight. "You have any regrets?" Florence asked. "About marrying me, about the life we have built?" Blake looked at her in surprise. "Not a single one. Why do you ask?" "I just want to make sure. You have given me so much. I want to know that I have given you enough in return." Blake took both her hands in his. "Florence, you have given me everything. You gave me a home when I was a wanderer. You gave me love when I was alone. You gave me children when I thought I would never have a family. You gave me purpose and meaning. You are everything to me. You always have been." "I love you so much," Florence whispered. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. And I love you forever and always." They returned home to Nevada to find that Benjamin had come home for a visit, bringing with him a young woman he wanted them to meet. Her name was Sarah, and she was studying to be a teacher. She was smart and kind and clearly adored Benjamin. Florence could tell immediately that this was serious. 6 months later, Benjamin and Sarah were married in the same little church where Blake and Florence had exchanged vows. Benjamin asked his father to be his best man and his mother to give a reading during the ceremony. Florence chose the passage from Ruth. "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay." As Florence read the words, she thought about her own journey, about the man who had chosen to go where she went and stay where she stayed, even though it meant pushing a wheelchair and adapting his life to accommodate her needs. She thought about the life they had built together, the children they had raised, the love that had sustained them through every challenge. 2 years later, Benjamin and Sarah gave Blake and Florence their first grandchild, a boy they named Blake Thomas, after both his grandfathers. Florence held the baby in her lap, sitting in the wheelchair that had been part of her life for over 20 years now, and she marveled at the miracle of it all. "Your grandmother was told she would never have children," Blake told little Blake Thomas, even though the baby was far too young to understand. "She was told she had no value, but she proved everyone wrong. She had your father and your aunt, and now she has you. And she has been valuable to more people than we can count." Marie, who was now 24, married a young rancher named Jack who shared her love of horses. They built a house on a corner of Blake and Florence's property, expanding the family ranch. Marie and Jack had twins, a boy and a girl, giving Blake and Florence 2 more grandchildren to spoil. As Blake and Florence entered their later years, they settled into a comfortable rhythm. They would wake early, have coffee on the porch while watching the sunrise. Blake would do his work with the horses while Florence tended to correspondence, managed the ranch's books, and saw the occasional patient who needed her help. In the evenings, they would sit together, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's presence. Sometimes their children and grandchildren would visit, filling the house with noise and laughter. Other times, it would just be the two of them, content in the life they had built. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that drew people from all over the county. People Florence had helped bring into the world, people Blake had trained horses for, friends they had made over the decades. The celebration lasted all day, with food and music and stories. As the sun set and the party wound down, Blake and Florence found themselves alone on their porch once more, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and red. 30 years, Florence said softly. It seems like both a lifetime and no time at all. The best 30 years of my life, Blake said. He had gray in his hair now and lines around his eyes, but to Florence, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him standing in that dusty street in Eureka. Blake, thank you, Florence said. For what? For seeing me. For loving me. For never making me feel like I was less because of this chair. For giving me a life I never dreamed possible. Blake reached over and took her hand, a gesture they had repeated thousands of times over the years. You gave me the same gift. You let me love you. You let me be part of your life. You trusted me with your heart. That was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Around them, their ranch was quiet, the horses settled in the barn, the house warm and welcoming behind them. Florence thought about that day in Dr. Morrison's office, 31 years ago, when she had been told she had no value. She thought about the despair she had felt, the certainty that her life was over. And then she thought about everything that had come after. The cowboy who had seen her worth when no one else had, the love they had built, the family they had created, the lives she had touched through her midwifery work, the difference she had made in the world. She was not defined by her wheelchair or her limitations. She was defined by her love, her strength, her perseverance, and her heart. Blake had known that from the very beginning, and he had spent 3 decades proving it to her every single day. What are you thinking about? Blake asked, noticing the expression on her face. I am thinking about how wrong that doctor was. I am thinking about how much value a life can have, even when others cannot see it. I am thinking about how grateful I am for every moment of this beautiful, surprising, wonderful life we have built together. Blake squeezed her hand. You are priceless to me, Florence. You always have been and you always will be. And you are everything to me. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night breeze carried the scent of sage and horses, Blake and Florence Emerson sat together, still in love, still partners, still choosing each other every single day. They had proven that true value comes not from what a person can do with their body, but from the strength of their spirit and the depth of their love. And they had proven that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that begin when someone looks past what the world sees and recognizes the priceless treasure that lies within. Years continued to flow by like the creek that ran through their property, steady and sure. Blake and Florence aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their grandchildren grow, with little Blake Thomas showing an interest in law like his father, and Marie's twins developing their own unique personalities and talents. Florence's health remained relatively stable as she moved through her 50s and into her 60s. Her legs never regained function, and the pain was a constant companion, but she had long since learned to manage it and work within her limitations. Blake's health remained strong too, though he eventually had to hire more help with the horses as the physical demands of ranch work became more challenging. They talked often about the early days, about how Dr. Morrison had been so certain that Florence's life would be one of misery and isolation. They had heard through the years that the doctor had eventually retired and moved away, but not before telling several people that Florence Emerson was the most remarkable patient he had ever had the privilege of knowing. It was as close to an apology as they ever received, and they chose to accept it with grace. Benjamin established a successful law practice in Carson City and often took on cases for people who could not afford representation. He credited his mother with teaching him that every person had value, regardless of their circumstances. Sarah taught at the local school and was beloved by her students for her kindness and patience. Marie and Jack expanded their horse training operation, earning a reputation throughout Nevada and into California. Marie had learned from both her father's skill and her mother's compassion, treating each horse as an individual worthy of respect and understanding. She and Jack had 2 more children after the twins, giving Blake and Florence a total of 5 grandchildren who kept their lives full of joy and laughter. On Florence's 65th birthday, her children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. The grandchildren, now ranging in age from 5 to 15, took turns telling stories about their grandmother, about the things she had taught them, the wisdom she had shared. "Grandma taught me that being brave does not mean not being scared," said one of the twins, now 13. "It means doing what you need to do even when you are scared. She taught me that people are more than what you see on the outside," said little Blake Thomas, now 15. "She taught me to look deeper." Florence listened to her grandchildren with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the legacy she had built without even realizing it. These children would go out into the world with kindness and compassion, with an understanding that every person had inherent worth. That was a gift that would ripple outward for generations. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Blake and Florence lay in bed together, the moonlight streaming through their window. "We did well," Blake said softly. "Our children, our grandchildren, they are good people." "We did," Florence agreed. "Thank you for making it all possible." "We made it possible together," Blake corrected. "Everything we have, everything we built, it was both of us, always both of us." As Florence drifted off to sleep, safe and warm beside the man who had loved her for over 35 years, she thought about how different her life had turned out from what everyone had predicted. She had been told she had no value, but she had proven that wrong in every possible way. She had loved and been loved. She had raised children and helped bring countless babies into the world. She had built a home and a family. She had made a difference. The years that followed were peaceful ones. Blake and Florence settled into their role as the patriarch and matriarch of their growing family. They hosted Sunday dinners where 3 generations gathered around their table. They celebrated holidays and milestones. They supported their children and grandchildren through challenges and triumphs. When Florence turned 70, Blake was 72. He was still strong, still devoted, still pushing her wheelchair without complaint, still making her laugh, still telling her every day that she was priceless to him. One spring morning, they woke to find that the desert had erupted in wildflowers after an unusually wet winter. The landscape was transformed, covered in brilliant yellows, purples, and reds. Blake suggested they take a drive out to see it, and Florence eagerly agreed. They borrowed a wagon from Marie and Jack, one modified with a ramp so Florence's wheelchair could be rolled directly in. Blake drove them out into the desert, away from the ranch, until they were surrounded by nothing but wildflowers and sky and mountains in the distance. He stopped the wagon and helped Florence position her chair so she could see the view. Then he sat beside her, and they simply looked at the beauty around them. You remember when you first brought me out here to see the sunset? Florence asked. Before we were married. I remember everything about that day, Blake said. I told you I was falling in love with you and you cried. I cried because I could not believe it was real. I could not believe someone like you could love someone like me. Blake turned to look at her. Florence, all these years later, do you finally believe it? Florence smiled. Yes, I believe it. You have proven it to me every day for 37 years. You have shown me in 1,000 ways, big and small, that I am precious to you, that I have value, that I am loved. Good. Because it is true. It has always been true. They sat together among the wildflowers, two people who had defied expectations and built something beautiful from what others had seen as brokenness. They had proven that love was not about perfection, but about acceptance. Not about what a person could do, but about who they were. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Blake took Florence's hand. Do you know what I think about sometimes? What? I think about what my life would have been if I had not been in Eureka that day. If I had not seen those bandits take you hostage, if I had not met you. And I realized that I would have missed the most important thing that ever happened to me. You were not just the woman I fell in love with. You were the person who taught me what love really means. You taught me about courage and strength. You taught me that the most valuable things in life are not the things you can see with your eyes, but the things you can only see with your heart. Florence leaned her head against his shoulder. We saved each other, she said softly. I was told I had no value and you showed me I was priceless. But you were a wanderer with no home and I gave you a place to belong. We both gave each other the gifts we needed most. We did, Blake agreed. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. All of it, because all of it led to this, to us, to the life we built together. They stayed out in the desert until late afternoon, talking and reminiscing, making plans for the future they would share. When they finally returned to the ranch, they found their children and grandchildren waiting for them, having planned a surprise visit. The house filled with noise and laughter, with children running and adults talking. Blake and Florence presided over the chaos from their spots on the porch, watching their family with deep satisfaction and joy. As the evening drew to a close and family members began to leave, Benjamin pulled his parents aside. I have been asked to give a speech at the state capitol next month, he said. They want me to talk about equality and justice, about how we determine a person's worth. I want to tell your story, if you will let me. About how Mama was told she had no value and how Papa proved that was wrong. About the life you built together. I think it is a story people need to hear. Florence looked at Blake, then back at her son. If you think it will help people, then yes, tell our story. The speech that Benjamin gave the following month became quite famous in Nevada. It was reprinted in newspapers throughout the state, and people began writing to Florence and Blake, thanking them for their example, telling their own stories of overcoming adversity and prejudice. Florence was surprised by the response. She had never thought of herself as remarkable or inspiring. She had simply lived her life the best way she knew how, with the support of a man who loved her. But if their story could help others, could encourage people to look beyond surface differences and see the inherent worth in every human being, then she was grateful their struggles had meaning beyond just their own lives. More years passed. Blake and Florence celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and now even a few great-grandchildren. The youngest generation had never known a world without Grandma Florence in her wheelchair, and they climbed on it freely, treating it as just another piece of furniture, which delighted Florence to no end. Blake's hair had gone completely white, and Florence's was silver as moonlight. They moved more slowly now, both of them feeling the weight of their years. But their love had not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger, tempered by time and trials into something unbreakable. One evening in late autumn, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains they had looked at together for more than 4 decades, Florence turned to Blake with a serious expression. "I need to say something to you," she said. Blake immediately gave her his full attention, hearing the gravity in her tone. "What is it?" "I need to thank you, truly thank you, not just for loving me or marrying me or staying with me, but for refusing to see me the way the world wanted to see me. For insisting that I had value when I could not see it myself. For building a life with me where I could flourish despite my limitations. For giving me children and grandchildren and a legacy I never dreamed possible. You changed the entire course of my life, Blake. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Blake's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Florence, you saved me too. I was drifting through life with no purpose, no direction, no real meaning, and then I saw you and everything changed. You gave me something to care about, something to work for, something to believe in. You made me want to be better than I was. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to get up every morning. We saved each other." They held hands as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors one last time that day. Around them, their ranch was peaceful, the legacy they had built together stretching out in every direction. Children and grandchildren who carried their values forward. Land they had worked and improved, a community they had served and been part of. "No regrets?" Florence asked, as she had asked many times over the years. "Not a single one," Blake answered, as he always did. "Every moment with you has been a gift. Every moment with you has been a blessing." As night fell and stars began to appear in the vast Nevada sky, Blake and Florence remained on their porch, content in each other's presence, grateful for the life they had shared. They had started their journey together in doubt and fear, with the weight of the world's judgment heavy upon them. But they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that proved love could transcend any limitation, any obstacle, any prejudice. They had proven that a person's value was not determined by their physical abilities or by the judgments of others. It was determined by the content of their character, the depth of their love, and the positive impact they had on the world around them. Florence had been told she had no value. Blake had said she was priceless. And together, they had built a life that proved him right beyond any shadow of doubt. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Blake and Florence continued to face each one together, their love a constant in an ever-changing world. Their story became part of the history of Eureka, told and retold as an example of true love and the foolishness of judging others by superficial standards. And every person who heard their story came away with the same understanding, that the most valuable things in life cannot be measured by conventional standards, that love sees what the eyes cannot, and that every human being, regardless of their circumstances or limitations, has inherent, incalculable worth. Blake and Florence Emerson had proven that truth, not with words but with lives well lived, with love freely given, with a family beautifully raised, and with a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. They had taken what the world saw as a tragedy and transformed it into a testament to the power of love, acceptance, and the unshakable belief that every person is priceless to someone who truly sees them. And in the end, that was the greatest gift they gave, not just to each other but to everyone whose life they touched. The gift of knowing that worth is not about what you can do, but about who you are. And that true love does not see limitations, it sees only possibilities.